can hear me. All
Hi,
right, very
everyone.
good. Good to see all of you. Lisa, are you going to start us off with a meditation?
Yeah, so I'm gonna just start us off with just a brief grounding, centering meditation, just to get us all here and present. So if it's safe to do so, you can gently close your eyes. Become aware and in tune with your breathing, following the in-breath and following the out-breath. And every in-breath is an opportunity to breathe in the peace and the joy and the love that you are. And every out-breath is an opportunity to let go of that which no longer serves. Allowing your attention and awareness to drop more fully into your body, feeling your internal body, feeling the aliveness of the body, allowing yourself to be present right here, right now. And bringing some awareness to the soles of the feet, just welcoming in that beautiful energy of Mother Earth, of Gaia, just allowing her nurturing energy to flow into you. It goes just where it's needed, allowing her energy all the way up the body to the very top of the head. There at the top of the head, welcoming a beautiful column of divine white light, source energy, pure fundamental beingness, pure formless awareness. And just allowing that energy to move into you, to cascade over and into you, filling you with vitality, washing away all the cares of the world, just allowing yourself to be here deeply in this present moment. And now bringing awareness to the heart area, the heart space, and just feeling that beautiful, subtle field of alive, alert awareness of the love that you are and all beings are, the one shared love, the one shared intelligence and truth. And just keeping this sense of an anchoring there as you now come back, gently opening your eyes, coming back into awake, alert awareness, fully present, coming back to the screen, feeling yourself grounded and ready to share in this gift of time we get to spend with one another. just a quick note before I turn it back over to Rob. I just wanted to let you know that I, and really Rob too, are not very good multitaskers. So if you send us a direct message in the chat, we may not get to it. So if there's something that you want to ask, it's best to send it to Stephanie. So that way Rob and I can be fully present with you. Okay, Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Stephanie. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to our free Zoom event. This is something we do every few months, partly to introduce new people to our work and partly to take people who are familiar with it a little bit deeper. So if you're not familiar with what we do, I'm the author of 3 books. The premise of all 3 is that we plan our lives, including our biggest challenges, before we're born, before we incarnate. And in the books, I go through all the major challenges in the Earth School in case study format and explain why somebody actually planned that very difficult experience prior to incarnation. I'm also a hypnotist. I specialize in something called a between-life soul regression, which is a form of hypnosis in which you can speak with what is called your council of elders, the wise, loving, highly evolved beings who oversee your personal evolution, and ask them any question you have about your life. Most people ask, what did they plan? Why? How are they doing? And how can they do better? But you can ask literally any question that occurs to you. And if it's for your highest good, your counsel will answer. I want to start by giving you a very Reader's Digest condensed version of the fundamental information I found in the research for my books. 5 main reasons why we plan big challenges for ourselves before we incarnate. If you've heard this before, bear with me, it will just take a few minutes. So the first reason is balancing and releasing karma. Those are not the same thing. Balancing karma means you planned a new experience that offsets a previous experience. Releasing karma means you heal the underlying tendency that created the karma in the first place. The example I always like to give of balancing karma, let's say the 2 people had a past life together in which one was ill and the other was the caregiver. When that lifetime is over and they have their life review, they'll see the caregiving relationship portrayed in the review. And if they feel incomplete with that relationship for any reason at all, they will want to balance that incomplete energy. So most likely they'll just end up trading places. The one who was ill will plan to be the caregiver. The one who's the caregiver will plan the life challenge of physical illness. That's the first reason for planning big challenges before we're born, is balancing and releasing karma. The second reason is healing. And this refers primarily to healing unhealed energies from past lives. For example, in my first book, Your Soul's Plan, there's a story of a woman who plans to be born completely deaf in both ears. And when we go into her pre-birth planning session, we find out that in the lifetime prior to this one, when she was a little girl, she heard her mother shot to death by the mother's boyfriend. She was traumatized by that, as you might expect, and it led to a suicide later in that incarnation. So she returned to spirit with this, you could call it an energy of unhealed trauma that now needs to be healed. In her pre-birth planning session, her guide says to her, my dear, would you prefer to be born deaf so that no similar trauma will happen to you again, and so that you can complete your healing from the last lifetime? And she says, yes, that is what I want and what I wish to do. And then what ensues is a fascinating dialogue between her and her guide in which they work out the details of the deafness. That's the second main reason for planning big challenges, is healing. The third is service to others. If you read spiritual or metaphysical literature, you've probably heard of the concept of oneness. This is the idea that there's actually only one being in the universe, and it's you, it's me, it's all of us. Each of us is an individualized expression of the one. When we're back in spirit planning an upcoming lifetime, oneness is not just an intellectual concept the way it is here, it's actually your experience. So if you can imagine that you and I are planning a lifetime together, and you actually perceive, you experience that I am literally you, then of course you will want to be of service to me. And conversely, if I perceive that you are literally me, then of course I will want to be of service to you. Every pre-birth plan I've ever looked at, and I've looked at a lot of them at this point, every single one without exception has some component of service to others in it. And I think it's just a reflection of the oneness consciousness in which we do the pre-birth planning. That's the third reason for planning big challenges: service to others. The fourth, and this I think is really the big one out of the five, is a desire to experience contrast, which basically means experiencing what we could call not love, which we would all agree there's a lot of in the Earth School. The reason we want to experience quote unquote not love is because we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. And when we're back on the other side, we're in a realm of only unconditional love. So we experience no contrast to ourselves, and in turn, we don't fully understand or appreciate what it means to be a being made from the energy of unconditional love. By coming into the Earth School and experiencing not love, by the time you go home at the end of an incarnation, through that contrast, you understand much more deeply what unconditional love is, which is another way of saying you have a much more profound self-knowing. That's the fourth reason. And the fifth, strictly speaking, is a subset of number two, healing, but it's so important I like to break it out as a separate item of its own. And that is healing or correcting false feelings or false beliefs about oneself. When I say false here, I mean false from the perspective of your soul. The way this one works is that almost everybody has had at least one past life, and usually many, in which certain things happened that caused you to pick up a false belief or feeling about yourself. The most common being that one is powerless, unworthy, or perhaps even worthless. If you feel or believe yourself to be powerless, unworthy, or worthless, to your soul that feels highly discordant, and your soul will want you to heal or clear the false feeling or false belief. So we come into the Earth School and plan challenges that reflect those false feelings or false beliefs back to us, not as some form of self-punishment, but rather to bring into conscious awareness the underlying false feeling or false belief. Once it's in conscious awareness, then you can set about healing it. So that's reason number five, healing or correcting false feelings or false beliefs about the self. So that is the thumbnail sketch of why we plan big challenges before we incarnate. Now, I want to spend some time tonight talking about suicide. And I'd appreciate it if you could raise a physical hand if you have lost somebody you care about to suicide. I'd just like to get a sense of who's here. Okay. And raise a physical hand if you know someone who has lost someone they care about to suicide. Okay. So that's got to be about 90% of the people who are here, which is what I was expecting. And this is one of the reasons why I want to talk about suicide, because it's really much more common than most of us realize. So in my second book, Your Soul's Gift, there's an entire chapter about the pre-birth planning of suicide. And a lot of that chapter is a channel discussion that I have with Jesus, in which I ask him all kinds of questions about the pre-birth planning of suicide. The first question I ask, of course, is suicide planned before we're born? And he says it is never planned as a certainty, but it is planned as a possibility, a probability, or rarely a probability so high as to be almost certain. And then we get into a discussion, and this is the part that I really want to share with you. And I'll read you some of his words so you can see exactly what Jesus has to say about suicide. I ask him how people can release the guilt or self-blame they feel at not preventing the suicide of a loved one. And he says, quote, and for those of you who have the book, I'm on page 410, and then I'm going to page 411. Jesus says, quote, "You gradually realize that you did the best you could and that you could not have prevented the suicide. There comes a point in the decision-making process of people contemplating suicide when it is between them and themselves. It is their choice. Respect this. Guilt and self-blame ultimately express an overestimation of one's power. It was not in your power to prevent the suicide. No one has such power. To accept and respect one's own humanness can help to release guilt and self-blame." Then we come into the part that is really the crux of what I want to share with you tonight. And this I consider to be perhaps the single most healing piece of information I've come across in all the years I've been looking into pre-birth planning. So, when I'm writing a book, I try to be very mindful of the information that comes across my desk, because I know that if there's something I'm supposed to know about so that I can put it in a book and let all of you know about it, Spirit will find a way to get that information to me. And this happened while I was working on the suicide chapter. I came across a wonderful book by a woman named Irene Kendig. It's called Conversation with Jerry and Other People I Thought Were Dead, which I think is a great title. And what Irene does in this book is that, talking through a medium, she speaks with her friend Jerry, who's back on the other side, and a number of other people who she thought were dead. In one of her conversations with Jerry, the subject of suicide comes up. And Irene shares through the medium with her friend Jerry the following true story. It's a very simple story. It's about a brother and sister named Dan and Denise. Dan and Denise made plans to meet for dinner one night. And then shortly before they were going to meet for dinner, Denise called Dan and canceled. Then during the time at which they would have been at dinner, Dan suicided. So now his sister Denise believes that she's to blame for her brother's suicide. She thinks that if she just hadn't canceled the dinner plans, her brother would still be alive. So Irene shares this story with Jerry. And listen to what Jerry says in response, because this is really quite extraordinary. Quote, "Even if she had dinner with him, Dan still would have had to be willing to create an opening in order for her to have made a difference. If he'd been willing to create an opening, someone, in this case Denise, would have stepped in. And even if she hadn't, someone else would have. Something as simple as a smile or kind word from someone would have made the difference. Everything is orchestrated. If Dan had needed someone's assistance to guide him in a new direction, someone would have been there. There is always a response to our needs. Had he been open to such a change, the universe would have responded to the opening." Now, I don't know what your reaction is to that, but when I read this, the implication struck me like a lightning bolt. So I took this story into the Channeling with Jesus. I shared it with him just as I've shared it with you. And then I said to him, quote, "This story seems to suggest that every suicide that could have been prevented was prevented. Is that true? If it is, this awareness would do wonders to relieve the guilt people feel at not preventing a suicide." And Jesus responds, quote, "All suicides preventable by outside forces were indeed prevented." I'll read it again. "All suicides preventable by outside forces were indeed prevented." So what this means is that if you lost somebody you love to suicide, there was literally nothing you could have done, because if the person had any openness or willingness to change their mind, Spirit would know and Spirit would stage an intervention. This to me is just an extraordinarily healing piece of information. And I try to get it out there as much as I can, because I know that it can make such a big difference in people's lives. If you lost somebody you love to suicide, I would invite you now to take any guilt or self-blame you may feel and set it down and step away from it. That's what your loved one wants for you. And again, there was literally nothing you could have done. I'll share with you a true story. I had the opportunity to meet somebody who was contemplating suicide, and Spirit staged an intervention because he had a little bit of openness or willingness to change his mind. About 10 or 15 years ago, I was in the UK for a few weeks to give a number of talks. And I was somewhere in northern England. And a couple of days before I was scheduled to give a talk, there was a young man in his 20s who was sitting alone at a train station. He was very depressed. He was in a state of great despair. And he was in so much despair that he was having an internal debate in his mind between what he felt were his only two options in life: one, suicide, or two, take money from somebody who had just withdrawn it from an ATM. That's where he was at. So he's having this debate with himself, trying to choose one of those two things. All of a sudden, this hooded figure walks up to him. This person is literally wearing a hoodie, and the hood is pulled so far forward that he couldn't see any of the person's face. The hooded figure comes up to him and says, "Don't kill yourself. Don't steal money from somebody at an ATM. There's a spiritual study center a few blocks down the street from here. Go there, see what happens." And then the hooded figure walks away. Well, the young man was so stunned that this being knew what he was thinking. He did as he was told. He got up, he left the train station, he walked a few blocks to the spiritual study center. When he got there, he met the woman who owns it. He told her a little bit about himself. She said, "You know, in a couple nights, this American author, me, is going to be giving a talk. Why don't you come to the talk and I'll arrange for you to meet privately with him when the talk is over." He did that, and that's why I know this story. This is what he shared with me that evening. But my role in his life was very minor. The key role here was played by the woman who owns the spiritual study center. She ended up taking him into her home for several months. I don't know what happened after that, but hopefully he was able to turn his life around and is still with us and is leading a happy life somewhere. But the point here being, Spirit knew that he had some openness to change his mind. And I think that mysterious hooded figure most likely was an angel who had assumed human form. That would be my guess. So again, if you lost somebody you loved to suicide, there was literally nothing that you could have done about it. That's the main thing I wanted to share with all of you tonight. Liesl is now going to talk about ascension, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and we can talk about anything that you would like to talk about.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, I think all of us can agree that right now is a really tumultuous time. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that humanity is undergoing this seismic shift in vibration. We're going from separation mindedness into unity consciousness, and the effect that that's having in the world is that all of the stuff, both collective and individually, is coming up to be looked at and brought into the light and processed. So this is, I think, really, it's really important to recognize that this is going on so that you don't become, depressed by the state of the world, by the state of your own internal experience. Because the fact that all of this stuff is coming up to be looked at is ultimately a good thing. It's essentially like if you had a wound and it was underneath the surface, sort of festering for a long, long time. Well, eventually, in order for it to truly heal, it would need to come to the surface of the skin and probably would look really unpleasant. But that's the way in which it heals. It comes to the surface so that it can be excised from from collective humanity. And one of the things that is important during this process is to recognize that a way in which you can really work with this purification process that's happening is to be aware that your stuff is going to come up, to be aware that whatever latent issues you have, whatever lower vibrations are still in your consciousness, they are going to be coming up right now. And oftentimes there will be a trigger in your life that will bring this to the fore. So somebody will act in a certain way, and then you'll respond. And the tendency is to think that the response is due to the trigger. But really, that's only providing the catalyst for it. Really, that energy is something that was latent inside you. And so it's important to remember that whatever is happening in the external, that's a lot of times that's really not what the emotion or the response or the pattern is about. And your mind will give a story of like, oh, yes, it's very justified to be, angry about this and for these reasons, etc. But ultimately, there's probably a lot of that is stored energy that is coming up that resonates with the current experience. And so we're sort of glomming onto that experience. And if you can see that as it's happening, it can help you not be so reactive in situations, and particularly when other people are involved, so that you don't devolve into getting triggered and then you trigger the other person, etc., etc. Rob, do you want to share a little bit about your perspective on ascension? I feel like you give a good perspective on it. And also, I love the way you talk about that analogy of the shadow, the light and the shadow it casts.
So the history here, as I understand it, is that eons ago, in what would be linear time, the billions of souls who are incarnate on planet Earth now got together, and we said to ourselves, we would like to make a unique contribution to the Godhead, to the universe. What could that be? And a lot of ideas were kicked around. And then we came up with the idea. Remember, I said earlier, we're in a state of oneness on the other side. We came up with the idea of what would it be like to not be in a state of oneness, to experience individuality, separation. And this is the idea that it had never been done before. So this was the idea we decided to go with. As I understand it, those who love and guide us, those who are more evolved than we are, told us, we do not recommend that you go forward with this plan. We foresee tremendous suffering. And at that point, there was a lot of debate, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Is this a good idea? Is it not? Should we do it? Should we not? When all that debate was over, those who love and guide us and who are more highly evolved than we stuck to their position and said, we do not advise you to do this. We foresee great suffering. And we essentially said, noted, but we've got this. We can do it, and we are going to do it. And so then beings began to incarnate on Earth in a state of perceived separation. I use the word perceived because you can't actually separate from the one. But what you can do, and what we did do, is create an illusion in which we appear to be separate beings. The illusion is created primarily by the limitations of the five senses. So over time, as humans were incarnating on Earth, this perceived separation created fear and created the ego. And then the ego prompted us to make increasingly more fearful, more lower vibrational decisions. The vibration of the human race went down and down and down. And we ended up with the sorts of problems that we have on planet Earth right now. What's happening through ascension is that the separation is being reversed. we're essentially going home while remaining in a physical body. It's considered a great honor to be here on Earth for a physical ascension. It's been attempted twice before, as I understand it, and it failed both times. It's my understanding that we will succeed. It's actually a foregone conclusion that we will succeed this time. We've already done enough of the groundwork to know that we are going to be successful. It's just a question of finishing the process. The analogy that Lisa was talking about, people look around and they watch the news, they see what's happening in the world, and it looks pretty bleak. And a lot of people feel like it's worse than ever, and that things are increasingly getting worse and worse and worse. If you think about what happens when light strikes an object, it casts a shadow. And the brighter the light, the darker the shadow, until at a certain point, there's so much light that it just dissolves the shadow. I think the human race is at the point of maximal darkness of the shadow, which is just one step removed from so much light that it dissolves the shadow. So that's the perspective I would like you to keep in mind when you look around and it looks like things are getting worse. We're just one step removed from the light dissolving the shadow. Okay. Should we talk about upcoming events for a couple minutes and then take questions?
Sure.
Okay, we have some things coming up that we would like to tell you about. And we have a discount for you by virtue of being here tonight. On November 3rd, we have our Star Souls workshop. Liesl and the Beings of Light, channel of the Star Souls regression. So Liesl, do you want to tell people about that?
Yeah, so actually I thought I would share what the Beings of Light have to say about the Star Souls workshop. Here's what they say. Those who have deep connections to and gifts gained from other planetary, galactic, or dimensional lifetimes are one of the most powerful and currently underutilized resources in the transformation of human consciousness, particularly during this time of ascension. Star souls have been incarnating on Earth in greater and greater numbers in order to help humanity reach a critical threshold of vibration. Because these individuals can often struggle just to function in earthly society and earthly vibration, their tremendous gifts and luminous cords of energetic connection often go unacknowledged and unactualized. This workshop is meant to provide a nurturing and supportive environment in which participants can begin to open to and learn about these gifts and energies, and begin the process of fully aligning with their star soul's mission on Earth. So many of you long for home, and yet it is through you that home is brought here to Earth. That last sentence really resonates with me because I've always felt like, I'm not from here, and have always felt like I want to go home because this, feels so very different than home.
Oh, tell them about your Seaweed of Light incarnation.
So one of the I have a lot of past life memories of lifetimes not on Earth. And one of my favorites is this world in which you are just light and you're rooted, you're anchored kind of in one place, and you just move like this. It's just this beautiful opalescent light that just moves. And there's a sense of having great intelligence, but there's no thinking going on. It's just being. You just are as this light. And so the closest thing that I can relate to it is seaweed. So because seaweed, just kind of goes like this in the ocean. So I call it the Seaweed of Light planet. And so sometimes I joke with Rob, when things are really crazy. I'm like, oh, next time you're coming with me to the seaweed of light planet. But you don't have to necessarily have recollections of past lives elsewhere, to get a lot out of this this workshop. Really, ultimately, all of us have lifetimes beyond earthly lifetimes, and this particular regression is really focused on strengthening your energetic cords of connection with the higher realms, and really activating the gifts that you've brought in to the world, so that you can share them, particularly in this time. So and another thing that it can be really helpful for is helping people attune to and tune back into perhaps lifetimes that were on Earth, but in cultures that were maybe ancient cultures or indigenous cultures that were very connected to the stars, very grounded in that. So if any of that resonates for you, we would love to have you join us on, is it November 3rd, Rob?
Mm-hmm.
November
Stephanie, can you
3rd.
put a link in the chat box? And the discount code is star 15, all caps, capital STAR 15. That'll take 15% off. So that's November 3rd. November 7th, there's a free Zoom call like this one, but with French translation. So if you know anybody who speaks French and is interested in metaphysics, please let them know. November 10th, there is a Between Lives Soul Regression workshop with Spanish translation. November 12th is the Aligning with Ascension workshop. So in that workshop, we will go into much greater detail about what ascension is, how to best work skillfully and lovingly with the ascension energies, so that it doesn't take too much of a toll and you're able to contribute more to the ascension process.
And there's also in that workshop, there's also a channeled meditation from the beings of light that I channeled, and Rob will lead you on to kind of really help connect you with the deeper energies.
November 19th and the third Tuesday of every month, we have a spiritual community that meets from 7 to 8:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, called Rise to the Path. And for any of you who are looking for community, this is really a beautiful community of loving, open-hearted people who share their spiritual path with each other and talk about anything that we would like to talk about, support each other through whatever they may be going through. Lately, we've been working with something I call the divine virtues, which you might have heard me talk about elsewhere. A lot of the pre-birth planning, when we plan challenges, is based on a desire to cultivate certain qualities that are important to the soul. And I call these qualities divine virtues. It's things like unconditional love, patience, empathy, compassion, and so forth. So we're taking them one by one and spending a month working on certain virtues. This month, we're working on compassion, which we thought was particularly a good idea since the election is coming up in the US, and there's seems to be some lack of compassion between the two opposing sides. But Rise to the Path is really a wonderful community for those of you who are looking for that. And
another thing that's really a nice resource when you're a Rise to the Path member is that you have access to the Rise to the Path membership page, in which we have all kinds of excerpted meditations from previous meetings where I've led a meditation live with the help of the beings of light, or Rob, or it's been channeled ahead of time and Rob has led it with his masterful hypnotic voice. And there's lots of channelings, written channelings from the beings of light. There's past recordings of past sessions and all kinds of really good resources that you have access to.
And then December 8th is a Between Lives Soul Regression workshop, English only. This is the form of hypnosis I specialize in. It's a long regression. It takes about 2 hours. We go through some preliminary steps to help you relax physically and mentally. Then I guide you through a past life. It's almost always one that had a big impact on your plans for the current lifetime. And then I guide everybody in the group to their council of elders. When you get there, I'll prompt the group to ask a very long and very extensive series of questions that will cover all the major areas of your life. You can stick with those questions or go off and have your own conversation with the council or mix it up and do both of those things. But by the time that process is done, you should have a pretty good idea of what you planned, why, how you're doing, and how you can better fulfill your pre-birth plans. And you'll have opportunities to ask about all the major relationships in your life, your work, your emotional health, your physical health. We ask, what is your mission? What are your gifts to share with the world? We ask the council to give you certain experiences and a healing at the end. And Liesl and the beings of light hold energetically the space as that is happening, which really makes it quite a bit more powerful. So that also, there's a link now in the chat box for that. And again, the code for that one is *15 for 15% off. So let's take some questions. And let me see what has been submitted here. So this is a good question to start with because it's important and it's one that just about everybody has. Someone has asked, how do I know if I'm fulfilling my pre-birth plans? There are different things to look for. Look for feelings of excitement or joy. I think that in our society, we have a very narrow definition of those things. And excitement and joy are really communications from your soul. That's your soul saying, yes, this is the way for you. So if you feel excited about what you're doing or something you're thinking of doing or joyful, that's a very good sign. Another thing to look for is what I refer to as time distortion. Probably for every one of you, there's at least one activity, if not more than one, that when you do it, you'll become so wrapped up in what you're doing, it will feel to you like only 10 minutes have gone by, but when you look at the clock, it'll be an hour later. Any activity that creates time distortion for you, there's something there that is part of your pre-birth plan. That's a very, very good sign. Liesl, what are your thoughts on that question?
I think those are two really good pointers that you gave.
Okay, there's another question here. Someone asked, interesting question, if I don't want to return through the womb, is there another way to return to Earth? I'm going to assume here that you mean return as a human, not as a rock or a plant or an animal. The answer is yes, you can return as a walk-in. If you've never heard that term before, walk-in is a phenomenon in which the original soul in the body leaves or quote unquote walks out of the body. Now, normally the body would die, of course, at that point, but there's another soul back in the non-physical who, for reasons of their own, feel that they are best served not going through infancy and childhood. They can do what they want to do and learn what they want to learn and serve how they'd like to serve best by starting off in a mature body. So that soul chooses to, quote unquote, walk in to the physical body. That kind of exchange is often engineered in a severe accident or a severe illness. Somebody will go into the hospital, they'll go into a coma. When they come out of the coma, you hear these stories that the loved ones say they're a completely different person ever since they came out of the coma. Well, they actually are. It's a different soul in the body. There's a famous walk-in that you will all have heard of, and that is Saddam Hussein. It's my understanding that toward the end of the war with Iraq, Hussein was walking along a riverbank in Iraq, and his soul walked out, and another soul, a very, very high vibrational soul, walked in. Now think about the timing of the walk-in. That was taking place with the walk-in soul fully aware of the fact that Hussein was about to be captured, imprisoned, tried, and put to death. You might ask, why in the world would any soul want to have that experience? Well, let's come back to the divine virtues that I referred to a moment ago. That is a unique and quite extraordinary opportunity to cultivate some of the virtues. Which virtues could a soul cultivate by going through that experience? Well, compassion, both in the form of self-compassion and perhaps compassion for those who imprisoned and tried and convicted and put to death the Hussein. Self-love, certainly. There would be a great opportunity and a lot of motivation to deepen in faith and trust. Those are just a few of the divine virtues that could be greatly cultivated in those circumstances. Let's see what else people have asked here. And if you want to ask a live question, raise a virtual hand and we will call on you. So one person has asked, why do we choose a lifelong chronic health issue? So there are two answers there. One is how it can benefit the person who has the health issue. The other is what does it do for those who are in that person's life? For the person who has the health issue, again, come back to the virtues: faith, trust, acceptance, patience. For those who are caring for the person with the health issue, compassion, patience. A lot of that is about service to others. The soul wants to have experiences of things like compassion. You can't cultivate compassion by reading about it. You can't cultivate compassion by thinking about it. You cultivate it by having an experience of compassion. And that's one of the reasons that something like a chronic health issue is often planned. Let's take a live question and go to Stephen. Can you unmute?
Well, wait.
Oh, sorry.
Are we done with the submitted questions, Ron?
We can be, or I can come back to them later.
Well, we should because we'll need to stop the recording when we take the live questions, we should probably do all submitted ones first.
Okay, let me take one or two more then.
Okay.
Here's an interesting question. How does the pre-birth planning process work? Who finalizes the plan? As I understand it, what happens is the pre-birth plans are created by your soul, by your higher self, in consultation with God, ascended masters, angels, and spirit guides. Then the soul creates the personality. The personality that's going to incarnate is a small portion of the soul's energy that's going to go into the physical body. The personality is informed of what the life plans consist of. Now, when that happens, you feel this overwhelming unconditional love radiating from your soul and from your guides. So the vast, vast majority of people know intuitively, they can feel all this love that the plan is based on. And so they agree to the plan, even if it's very challenging, because they know that it's for everybody's highest good. There's a very small percentage, however, who start to feel human experiences of fear and doubt, principally fear or doubt that it might be too much. If you express fear or doubt that it might be too much, you are reassured by your guides and by your higher self that this plan is in fact for the highest good of all beings, including you. At that point, the majority of those who express fear or doubt are reassured, they agree to the plan, and they incarnate. But there's a small percentage of the small percentage who expressed fear or doubt who continue to feel that way. And if you continue to express reservations, then the plan is amended until it's acceptable to you. So bottom line, nobody is ever forced to do anything they don't want to do. I'll take one more that was submitted, and then we'll go to the live questions. Give me just one moment here. So this is a common question. Can I break a soul contract with someone? Are there repercussions for doing this? So you have free will at every moment of your incarnation. And you can deviate from your pre-birth plans as often as you want, as much as you want. And you can, quote unquote, break contracts with other people as well. Free will is sacrosanct. It's always respected. It's always honored by the universe. But the lessons that you agreed to learn are still there. So if you don't follow through on an agreement with someone and the lesson hasn't been learned, the universe will bring to you other opportunities for you to master that lesson. By the same token, if your decision not to follow through on a pre-birth agreement hinders somebody else's evolution, then the universe is going to bring other people and other circumstances to that person that will substitute for the role that you were intended to play. Many of you will have heard of the Esther Hicks and Abraham. In the channelings that Abraham did, they call this the another boat phenomenon. It's like you're running to the pier to catch a boat and you miss the boat. So what happens? Well, then there's another boat. And if you miss that one, there's another boat, and then there's another boat, and then there's another boat, and there are an infinite number of boats. So the lessons will keep coming back around. You can defer them, but you can't pass on them. Okay, now let's take live questions.